episode 18, Crazy Damn Canadians. Mayor Lyn Hall, welcome to
Thank
the
you.
podcast.
Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. And for 80% of people that are watching or listening to this podcast right now, they probably just assume you're from Prince George, but you're not. Where are you from?
From Dawson Creek. Yeah, 4 hours from here, and born and raised in Dawson Creek. Went away to university after I graduated, and then back to Dawson. But spent a lot of time in Prince George as a young kid because this is where we came to play high school sports. This is where I came to play hockey against the Spruce Kings of the day. I mean, that was a long time ago. And lots of family still here. And, as fate would have it, I met my wife, and here I am.
You still have family up there, too?
Yeah, still got lots of family in Dawson Creek. And get back up there a couple times a year. And never once did I think I would move to Prince George, and the thought never crossed my mind that I'd be the mayor of Prince George one day. And I think the first time I came here, I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I remember playing basketball when I got into high school. Played against teams at Lakewood Junior over on Ospika, and Prince George Secondary. Played hockey at the old Coliseum. And here you are. It's interesting where life takes you.
That's the beautiful thing about life is here you are in your preteens or as a teenager competing in sports in Prince George. Yeah. No idea that you're going to be the future mayor of the city.
None.
How extraordinary is that? So did you meet your wife in Prince George?
Yeah, I did. I met her in Prince George. We had mutual friends, and they introduced us. We went out for breakfast. I think it was at the old Simon Fraser restaurant. I was on my way to Vancouver. And
how many years ago?
We're going to be married 35 years this year.
Well, congratulations.
So we met about 36 or 37 years ago. So therein lies me giving away, if everybody's calculating at home, my age.
Yeah.
Well, a couple big anniversaries, 35 for the wedding, and also, I believe, 20 years for your political career, because it was in 2001 that you joined the Prince George School Board as a trustee.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I had ran for council in 96 and 99 and lost. And so I thought, okay, that's it. And then there was a school board trustee by-election because Shirley Bond, MLA Bond, had stepped down to run provincially. And I think there was two other folks that stepped down. So there was room for three new people. And I had some people come to me and say, hey, why don't you consider running for the school board? And I did, and I got in the by-election, and then 5 years later became chair of the school board. And then in 2010 I thought, you know what, I've put 10 years in, that's enough. Probably need some new blood, and had thought a little bit about running for council, and made my decision to run for council when Mayor Green was in the chair. Spent 3 years as a councillor, and then 2014 ran for mayor.
You know what that exemplifies, Lyn, is, and I didn't know this is news to me, that you actually failed twice while running for city council.
Yeah.
How many people might have just thrown in the bag there and given up and said, you know what, I tried the political thing, I failed, not for me. It shows that perseverance and trying again and failure as a stepping stone instead of a hurdle that you back away from actually works.
Well, it was perseverance, and I always wanted to, I thought if I continued to live in Dawson Creek, I'd serve in some fashion. I considered council, but of course never did do that in Dawson because I ended up here in Prince George. And I think just perseverance and wanting to be able to, get involved at that level. So it worked out well.
I didn't know that, actually. This is news to me. I became aware of you when you became the mayor.
Yeah.
So interesting. So you, having been involved, you would have been following the news. I saw someone post something really interesting, and it was back in, I think it was the 1930s or 1940s. It was a Citizen news article. And what it talked about was the major issue in Prince George, which was revitalizing downtown because it had fallen into disrepair and it needed to be improved. Did you know that has been an issue in this city since they built downtown?
I didn't know until probably a couple of years ago, and I was going through some old paper clippings at City Hall and saw a couple headlines about downtown, about revitalization, about the economy, and then of course about our streets and our sidewalks. So it's interesting how the things that took place 30, 40 years ago are happening today. That's what's top of mind for people.
Some would argue that they've never really changed, that it's just always been a continuation of the conversation. And I think that probably stems from the fact that a lot of downtowns, like if you go to Kelowna, the lake, if you go to Kamloops, they have the river. And so that natural beauty that you get in many downtowns becomes the focal point. And of course, it stays beautiful year after year. It's the one thing Prince George has lacked is we'll never have that piece of nature in downtown, one would argue. So it'll always be buildings and concrete.
We parallel Kamloops in a lot of ways. Kamloops revitalized their downtown based on the river. They did a lot of work with heavy industry that were along the river. And I think when you take a look out my office or from any direction towards the river, we see much the same. We have that beautiful river. We have Cottonwood Island Park. We have the Railway Museum. We have a trail system going up to and through the Brink property along the river. But we haven't been able really to close the gap. So we still have fairly heavy industry between the river and our downtown. We have CN Rail Yard. And all those are just mainstays of the community. That's what's really driven the community economically for a number of years. CN Rail and Lakeland and Brink, and those are key components to the economy of our city. So when I got in, or when I ran in 2014, the question to me was, what are you going to do about downtown? And that question was based on the context of, what are you going to do from an economic perspective? I was not asked once about really the homelessness issue, the mental illness issue, the opioid issue. It was about the economy. And so that's what I focused on.
Yeah, so how do you feel? And I know we've already had this discussion. The reason you're a guest on this podcast episode is because I really enjoyed hearing your answers. So I even know some of the answers you're going to give. But I guess that one subject. So in 2014, first question is, you were told, what are you going to do about the economy of downtown? I would argue that the economy of downtown, the businesses have boomed by any measure. More restaurants. We're punching way above our weight category in restaurants downtown, original businesses, making all the streets two-way, cleaning up all of the covers, roof things that they had going up and down the roads, awnings.
Everyone forgets that word.
So what's your thoughts on it from that goal?
Sure. So in 2014, my goal was to create more residential space downtown. I felt and still feel today that if you're going to create a vibrant downtown, you need people living downtown. You need the amenities for them. And part of the amenities are being driven by that private sector. There's no question. So you mentioned all of the hotels, yes, but restaurants, the work that many have done, Nancy O's, Battelle Burning, Crossroads, places like that have really, really built up, I think, a different downtown. We don't have a nightclub downtown. Isn't that interesting? A city that at one point had 4 or 5, maybe 6 of them. So then the work began on what do we do about residential living, and so we took a look and had developers showing great deal of interest, and we started to turn that around probably in mid to late 2015, early 2016, where Prince George was a topic of conversation with developers and investors across the province. So we have the student housing this next to the Marriott. But let me just back up a minute. The Marriott only had the foundation when I came on the scene, and one of my first calls was to the Marriott folks and saying, look, you've got to get this built. We need this in downtown Prince George. So the Marriott has been developed. We got rid of the old RCMP building. We have the student housing building now next to the Marriott opening up this fall. And then we looked at what other residential development. So the Park House development, 9 on 7th, not exactly right downtown, but in close proximity.
Shout out to Christian Bragg and his team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing work there.
Yeah, great development. And we did have some real interest in the airspace at the Commonwealth Building, which is directly across the street now from the pool, and it didn't fly on a couple of occasions, but there's a developer there now developing that piece. I think that's going to give 30 plus units in our downtown, residential living. I think some market, some rental. And then, of course, Hyatt Place. And Hyatt Place came into being because some other developers pointed out to the owners of the Hyatt that we were interested in having another hotel downtown. So there you go. It's like a domino effect, you guys, and that's what happens. And so as we developed residential properties, we were fortunate enough to have the Hyatt come to town, fortunate enough to have businesses that are running restaurants, and the butchery, for example, is another key piece downtown. That all played a part in it. And then we went to referendum for a new pool, a new fire hall. That passed, and now we have an opportunity to do something I think significant in the years to come with the old pool location, the old Four Seasons pool, and the fire hall. And I think we can turn, and I term it that direct 7th Avenue precinct, we can tie that very nicely to Canada Games Plaza. So there we are. From a business perspective, from an economy perspective, that was really what I was after.
And you achieved it. In my opinion, and I think the people listening with that explanation would agree, you achieved it. I think that all of that happened. So now we hit the problem, though, which is that over the last couple of years, especially since the fires, when we had a lot of people come to Prince George who were in need, and we ended up flooded with people who were homeless and in need and suffering addictions. And I think that those people being together in the downtown core actually, like, in my opinion, they almost make it worse for each other. Like, if I go to East Van and I'm hanging out on East Van, drugs are right beside me at all times, because that the dealers know where you are now, and you end up feeding each other. That's the fear right now, is that we are creating an East Hastings, and the problem is it's not located on East Hastings. It's spreading out throughout downtown. Talking to Andrew, who creates the podcast for us, right to our left, he discussed that they're actually sleeping in the coast hotels on the ramps coming up, that people are forming tents on the ramps at nighttime. And that's the Coast Hotels, one of the premier hotels in Prince George. So I came to you before. Lyn Alpe had said, I want to solve the downtown homeless situation many years ago, because this is what Lyn does. And of course, it wasn't in the media because he wanted to do it privately.
And he mentioned that in his podcast too.
And he did, yeah. And so he was trying to solve it. But he pointed out something, I want you to confirm if it's true or not, that there's actually enough beds already in Prince George for most of the homeless population. True or false to your knowledge?
True, there is.
Okay, so everybody needs to stop and just listen to that statement right now. There's already enough beds. So everybody who's screaming, we need more beds, that's not the issue. So why are people camped in that park at the end of George Street then?
So I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a professional in that field, I'm not a doctor, but I will tell you from, I guess, the mayor's perspective and layman's perspective, and having this file sit on my desk since early 2016 and never move. We are continually working on it day after day, 7 days a week. Whether it's me, whether it's our staff, whether it's members of council. So there are people that are homeless, that are not drug addicted, and they are not suffering from mental illness because of hard luck or because of choice. They're on the street.
And that has to be a major misconception when people think homeless. They think they're in either one of the categories. There must be some addiction issues or mental health, or the combination. But there are a lot of individuals that don't fall into any of those categories.
Exactly. Yep. So what happens is, and you're absolutely right, since 2017 we saw an increase in the downtown population, if you will. And I've always wanted Prince George to be a big brother, if you will, the northern capital, providing services to communities that are much smaller than us. If you're in trouble, phone us. If we can help out in any way, phone us. So you see that we receive a number of people from around the north and central part of the province coming to Prince George, looking for help, looking for social service help, whether it's to deal with the drug addiction, whether it's to deal with mental illness. Perhaps it's just, look, I'm going to come to Prince George. I know I'm going to end up on the street, but I'll be taken care of, because there's ample opportunity for me to stay in a shelter and ample opportunity for me to be fed. We have 4 or 5 outlets within the community that provide meals 5, 6, 7 days a week. So we've seen a huge increase. When people approach me and say, what can we do? We'd like to donate to something. My answer is, be very careful about just donating and giving money. Put a cause on it, put a label on it, put a reason on that donation. And when I take a look at housing now, it's not good enough for me to say to the government at any level, we need more housing. I don't want just more housing. And that's why the integrated health model on First Avenue came to life. And I hope we get a chance, and we will, talk about partnerships. So we partnered with BC Housing, Ministry of Housing, and Northern Health. You're not just going to be able to go to First Avenue and hang your hat and stay there. You're going to go to First Avenue because it has integrated health services embedded in that operation. So if you show up and you have an addiction, you have mental illness, whatever the case may be, you'll be able to provide that person with housing, meals, and service. And to me, that's the key. The shelters provide just that. They provide shelter from being outside in any weather. They have stringent rules around being able to stay in the shelter, and some folks just absolutely do not want to live by those rules. So they won't go into the shelters and they'll stay on the street. But even at that, those shelters are providing outreach programs. So when it's 30 below, and they'll travel around downtown and see people sleeping on the street, and they'll provide a hot coffee or food and try to get them and convince them to go into the shelter for the night. If they don't, that's a choice that individual makes. So it's not about more housing, just housing and a roof over their heads. It's much more than that to be able to at least try to attempt to solve this. And somebody has said to me just recently, you know, what would be the ultimate in a solution? I said, you know, I don't know that there's a solution. I think there are intervals of solutions. A solution might last for 6 months. It might last for 3 weeks, and then you got to change direction. That's just the way this is. Talk to the mayors of Kamloops and Kelowna, and I belong to the BC Urban Mayors Caucus. There's 13 of us that represent the largest cities in the province. We suffer from the same thing across that board of 13. And we're phoning each other almost daily and saying, hey, this is a situation we have today. What are you doing about it? Well, this is what we started 2 weeks ago. So that's why I really hang my hat and am I guess maybe rolling the dice that this integrated health model in First Avenue is going to be a long-lasting solution.
So one of the other things people have asked for is, like, I'm going to use the Copper Pig as an example.
Yeah.
Amazing restaurant, amazing food. Tyler sunk his heart and soul into that, and it was a fantastic business. Yep. And it was people camping out on his front steps. Yep. Now, Tyler, I know that I just bought a building downtown and moved into it, and my company's in it, and we're paying $24,000 a year in tax, probably about the same size as Tyler. I'm going to assume he was paying $24,000. So when you're sitting in your house with your $3,000 tax bill, remember that every business downtown is paying 10 times what you're paying probably, because we're a small plot of land. And that very tax money is what provides the revenue to take care of those who can't afford to take care of themselves. But it's the homeless people downtown who shut that business down, sitting on the door so people would stop visiting it. I even heard a rumor that some of the businesses downtown pay homeless people to keep homeless people away from the front entrance just so that people will come in.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor too.
And every day I talk to people who refuse to walk downtown now. So all that effort went into getting the businesses, getting the residential buildings built, and we're on the knife edge, it feels like, where people will stop coming downtown.
Yep. And therein lies my frustration. Therein lies my frustration. All I've ever asked over the last 5 or 6 years, whether I'm talking to health professionals, social service agencies, people at the Needle Exchange, just understand the balance that I'm trying to get to. Understand where I'm coming from when I talk to developers and investors that want to come downtown. You coming downtown and purchasing a building, the Copper Pig purchasing a building, You can name a dozen of them. I just want people to understand that the challenge I have and the balance I'm looking for is that we need to have that economic development downtown. And we need to have the other side understand that economic development is a good thing, but we have to deal with the issue, as we refer to downtown, with the homeless population. And that is at times some pretty tough conversations that I have to have.
Well, and where the problem lay is that, for example, with us, when we moved in, we have a small courtyard in the front of our building, and people used that courtyard to do heroin. Well, we're financial services. Our clients coming in expect there to be a clean, safe place as they're coming to talk about their retirement plan. And people would be shooting up as in the morning, and they'd come there in the daytime because it was out of sight. I think we spent almost $40,000 on gates and chain link fence on the back, a full security system. And in the first month we were in, we got broke into, found someone in the building who just walked in. We learned very quickly you cannot leave your doors unlocked. Ours don't unlock anymore. And my vehicle got broken into by that prolific thief who was doing all the businesses downtown. I'm the guy that got him on camera that we had just installed, gave it to the RCMP, an hour later they had him and put him in jail. I was like, yes! So that was a win.
A win, yeah.
I'm going to say that was a win. Having said that, we spent all that money to do that. I got called out on social media the other day. And the reason I was called out was by a woman who said, why didn't you take the $10,000 you spent on those gates? Because we made custom gates that look nice so we wouldn't look like a prison. Why didn't you just feed some of those people downtown? And my thought was, if I gave that $10,000 to St. Vincent de Paul, it would have been used up in roughly a week or two. And I'd still have people doing heroin at my front doors. So eventually we'd just be another business pulling out, and you'd lose $24,000 a year every year of revenue from us paying taxes as we go try to find somewhere in College Heights. So now again, my thought was, answer me, why can't we, and I've had lots of people ask this, take some of those businesses where the people are congregating close to downtown, like the Salvation or the St. Vincent de Paul, and move them. Provide an incentive to say, we need to get you guys further away from the Copper Pig Crossroads so that you're not ruining the tax base and these businesses. People don't like that. They say, I'm unsympathetic, but I'm playing the devil's advocate. I'm going to play the bad guy. Sure. You tell me what's wrong with that.
So I'm going to use a couple of examples. We have a nuisance bylaw that affords us the opportunity to close down the Connaught, the Lotus, the Queensway Motel, which we've done, because it's been costing us a pile of dough for RCMP and first responders, firefighters to go to those locations. Now they're back up and running and doing okay. Penticton went through a period of time where they restricted people and moved them around and wouldn't allow them to sit or congregate in certain areas. Every municipality has the opportunity to do that. I don't know if you've heard of red zoning. It was done quite a number of years ago, where you would literally red zone an area where you would not allow the homeless population to enter into. If you did, then bylaw services would step in and move those folks. Things that we try will immediately result in the kinds of comments that you received, human rights issues and those kinds of things, because at the end of the day, they have a right to be there. So our tools are limited. We try to do as much as we can to be able to get folks moving. Our bylaw services, which we've expanded by 4, and I'll talk a bit about that, to move folks along rather than have them, and I'm going to use 3rd and George. Recently you saw all the people camped out at 3rd and George. They've moved, but they moved up to the park next to the regional district, and now we have a tent city.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So you can think about tent cities in Strathcona in Vancouver, Beacon Hill Park in Victoria, and what they had to go through to get those camps dismantled.
And some of those tent cities, they'll have running water and many systems of governance just within them. So
we have a few tools in place that we can move folks, but we know that they will come back. I've had somebody say to me, why don't you pick a place along on the other side near the Railway Museum? There's vacant land. Why don't you move people there? Why don't you move people to the old city yards down off of Queensway? And it's one thing to talk about it, one thing to try to do it, but we know from history they will not stay there. They will not make that a permanent home. It becomes a tent city. So when you move them, what are you offering them? And that's why when we talk about First Avenue, which is under construction, we hope that that's part and parcel of a potential cure for what we're seeing downtown with people all over 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, and 1st. The other piece of this is the crime. Some of these folks that are on the street are bad people, and they're taking advantage of those disadvantaged folks, either selling drugs, stealing from them, whatever it might be. And the RCMP really, at the end of the day, I would think, pull their hair out trying to determine how they are going to deal with that issue as well. So you have the whole mix of mental illness, drug abuse, homelessness, and crime. Perfect scenario. So there is no pat answer that I can give to try to move these folks, because we know history has shown if they move, they will come back.
I noticed they took the tent city down a while ago, and then I noticed it was back up about 2 weeks later. I saw it come down and the park looked nice in front of the regional district again, and then it was just put back up. And I went by it the other day and saw that. So in
2016, perhaps after the fire, I guess 2018, 2019, we spent and continue to spend in excess of $1 million a year taking down camps, doing our biohazard pickup downtown, doing our garbage pickup downtown, street cleaning, sidewalk cleaning, and then we're out into the parks. So we have parks people who do a fantastic job in keeping our parks beautiful. Guess what they're having to do? They're having to take down camps behind the Child Development Center and the ball fields, camps along the ravine. You pick a park, and I don't think I haven't heard of a park in our city that hasn't had some kind of camp set up. So we're spending in excess of $1 million a year in taxpayer dollars trying to maintain, trying to deal with the issue and maintain some semblance of order when it comes to the cleanliness of the downtown every year.
It really is just a sad situation. And to look back at the past 4 years, it's been very challenging. I mean, we had consecutive summers of wildfires, 2017, 2018, the growing opioid crisis. And then you look at last year, 2020, all of a sudden we're dealing with this global pandemic. Is there any estimate in terms of the increase in growth of the homeless population after the wildfires of 2017 and 2018? Do we roughly know how much it grew?
We don't know exactly, but we are doing a homeless count, and it'll be completed, I think, sometime around the end of June. And that homeless count is really just that, out on the street, trying to identify people that are literally homeless. And we can get some of that information as well from the shelters. But I would say, and this is just an educated guess, we've probably increased by 50 to 100 over the last short while. Doesn't sound like a lot of folks, but it is.
That's a lot of people downtown,
a lot of people
though.
Downtown.
We're not that big.
No, we're not. And when you take a look at downtown, and for me, it's sort of, it's all the way over to the Gateway, 20th, 15th, over to 5th and Victoria Street and up to Dutchess Park and around. But the downtown itself, the classified downtown, is just a few blocks. And so you will have the congregation of folks utilizing St. Vincent de Paul, the Needle Exchange, other social service and health services locations.
Well, we didn't answer the question about if the majority of people, like the reason they won't go to the city yards is that their food is up the road.
Right.
They stay near the St. Vincent de Paul. God, I hope those people don't hate me, because I bust my butt raising money for St. Vincent de Paul and for the Salvation Army, and I run clothing drives. So I'm taking a big risk playing the devil's advocate, saying this is all a problem and here's what I think. I'm trying to bring out the answers that have been given to me, knowing that you can give really articulate answers on why they do or don't work. Having said that, why not move St. Vincent, bring it closer to their food source, give them a free building down on that side of land. You're spending $1 million cleaning up the parks, but you could actually get people to stay in one area, have their food. Well, like First Avenue.
And I was just going to say, that's my answer. First Avenue. And I got to tell you, I've talked about it for far too long. So now when I go by and I see the hole dug and the foundations going in, I'm pretty excited. That first phase is going to be 100 units of residential living. And it is going to provide just those things you're talking about.
Okay, so that's 100. I thought you said 50 people.
No, so the first phase be done probably by September, October is 50, and then the other 50 will be done in the spring of 2022. So we've got 100 units that will provide all of the service that I've just talked about.
So that's a sizable chunk of the homeless population in Prince George. That's got to be a sizable chunk of it.
So here's the challenge. You're on the street, you have mental illness, mental health issues, or you're opioid addicted. Are you prepared to voluntarily go in and take advantage of that service?
Probably not.
That's the question.
That's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
Right there.
And St. Vincent de Paul and other locations provide what everybody needs, and that's food.
I don't disagree with that.
No,
I love them.
Yeah,
I just wish that it wouldn't form a camp outside of it as
Right.
people trying to access the food.
And I have concerns about what we're seeing at St. Vincent, obviously. My concern is with the folks inside the building that are preparing food, delivering food, those kinds of things. Are you safe in doing that? Particularly during COVID, or just your personal safety?
Yeah.
And that's a question where the answer becomes a little bit more complicated during a global pandemic, right?
If only there was a way to even clean that up so that as people accessed their food, it just wasn't this mass of humanity so close to all those businesses which are so vibrant and part of a vibrant downtown. I hate that there's an East Hastings. I hate the thought of shutting people away and shoveling them across Queensway, and then whatever businesses beside them is detrimentally affected. In some respects, some people say it's better that it's spread around so that you don't end up with an East Hastings. It's just that all the work to create that vibrant downtown is ruined by it. Because those very people who are bleeding hearts, some people call them, saying we've got to protect these people and care for them and be compassionate, won't go into the restaurant downtown. Even those people they won't even visit the businesses, the very businesses while they're claiming that. I challenge you to say, are you going to go walk past those people at 10 o'clock at night? Probably not. A lot of them won't. I know a lot of guys that won't go walk through those areas now.
And I do hear that. Obviously, I hear it. There are businesses in our downtown that have been there for 30, 40 years, and they are the lifeblood of that particular family. That's their retirement. And I hear from them a lot.
Northern Hardware.
Not sure if the closure of Northern Hardware was based on what was happening downtown. I don't know.
I saw a Facebook post from them saying that it was due to vagrancy, but that could have been a rumor.
Yeah,
That's the problem with social media. But that was my favorite business in Prince George, so I was really heartbroken about that one. I shop there all the time.
I think it's just, how do we manage it? How do we provide solutions that you hope work for a long period of time? We've created a community safety hub in the District Energy Building on the corner of George and 2nd, where we'll have bylaw services, we'll have RCMP, we'll have Northern Health, and others are in there that we're right down in the heart of it so that we can do a better job. Added 4 bylaw services to our team. RCMP have stepped up and they're doing 7-member patrol downtown in various hours, staggering hours, doing what we can, trying to light all of the back alleys, light up the downtown. I wish for those that are listening and will listen to this that I had just a solid answer, that this is the answer to it all. But I hope people have heard through our conversation that there just isn't one single answer to it.
I think you did a fantastic job. And I don't know that there's, have you anything else that you can think of on this subject that you would bring up?
Yeah, I think we could actually move on so it doesn't dominate the entire podcast. But I was actually on the drive over here. I was thinking about the UNBC Legacy Breakfast,
Yeah.
which is coming up, the 7th edition, and it's John Cooper, the
Yep.
head coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning, Stanley Cup winner, and it reminded me, Lyn, that the last normal event that we were at was at the Marriott, and it was the Legacy Breakfast on March 11th of 2020. And it was at that almost like awkward stage where everyone knew something big was happening. Like the World Health Organization
Yep.
just announced a global pandemic, and everyone was doing kind of like the foot kick instead of a handshake. But there was probably about 250 people in that room, no
Yep.
mask or anything. March 11th, 2020. Here we are 13 and a half months later. How challenging has it been as a mayor of a community of 80,000 plus people during a pandemic?
Interesting you should bring up the Legacy Breakfast. My daughter spoke at that, and they were Timberwolves for 5 years. And it wasn't long after that we canceled the World Women's Curling Championship, which was a real blow.
And the athletes already arrived at YXS Airport.
And for me, that in conversation with Curling Canada and the World Curling Federation, and the decision was made in the basement of the CN Center. We were on a conference call with all of them, and that's when it hit me. I thought, this is serious. We're in big trouble, and we've seen the extent of it. We wave after wave. We're into wave 3, and what does that look like? Is there a wave 4 and 5? We just can't snap our fingers and get out of it. It's been devastating financially for us as a city. I would think multiple millions of dollars, not only for us, but businesses, restaurateurs, hoteliers that were depending on Cirque du Soleil, World Championship, big Caribou Rocks in North, local events. And I don't know when that's coming back.
Are we going broke?
No. I mean, the city is not going broke, but we are in a situation where all of our revenues were depleted, really, when you think about the Civic Center and Coliseum and all of our recreation facilities. Transit system was impacted heavily to the tune of about $700,000 or $800,000 a month, I think it is.
Oh.
So, you know, when you take a look at the conglomeration of dollars we're losing, I think at one point collectively we were about $1 million a month. And then you talk about the revenue that's being lost in the private sector. So we have received a tremendous amount of grants for a lot of the projects we've been doing. We've received tremendous amount of support from the provincial and federal government, which has helped. It's helped carry us over. But little things, we didn't well, it's not a little thing, but we didn't reopen the Four Seasons pool. Thought, why open it when we don't know if we're going to be able to run it? And we're not that far away from opening up the new pool. So the decision was made just to mothball it. It's done. And at some point in time, it'll be leveled. And there was just little decisions like that. The Civic and Conference Center, why open it? Now, we have opened it because of Northern Health needing a large location for their vaccination program, which was the right thing to do. But it has been a challenge. And I look at smaller communities, David, that are just being hit hard and don't have the ability like we have as a larger center to be able to withstand this hit. But I will tell you, if it continues into 2022, it's going to be serious. And I don't mean to be the doom and gloomer today, but that's the reality of it. So we used a portion of our restart dollars so that we could give a 0% tax increase this year. We felt that it would help residents, help businesses. Government came in last year and did some things that we would still like to do again this year. Take away penalties for late payment on various things and postpone, if we could, certain payments to the city. But we've also got to remember that we're juggling all of this.
And I mean, there are certain ramifications of this pandemic that were completely unpredictable. I mean, who would have anticipated the housing market to be where it is today back in spring of 2020, where you literally have a realtor listing a house and there's bidding wars?
In 2019, and I'm very proud of this, in 2019 we set a development permit record, $232 million. In 2020, we were on our way to beating that by a long shot. And then we had 3 or 4 months where the bottom fell out. So virtually March through to probably July. At the end of last year, or at the end of, 2019, at the end of 2020, we missed the 2019 number by about $5 million. So that's how active the market is. And we're on pace again this year. But if you take a look at the businesses that are doing well, recreation, RVs, bike shops, organizations that sell motorcycles and skidoos and all-terrain vehicles and side-by-sides and boats.
Forestry.
Yeah.
Doing well. And look at the lumber prices. But what really hurts me is that mom and pop operation that's downtown Prince George, or took the next step and maybe they're in the mall. And again, I go back to the fact that that's their retirement.
Yeah.
They put their life savings into that. And those are the ones that are hurting immensely.
I think the answer to this is, and when you say doom and gloom, well, the answer is, and some people aren't going to like this, take the damn vaccine. Go with science. Go with science, and let's just assume the doctors and the whole world's doctors aren't lying. And if we take the vaccine, whether you like it or not, we have a chance to reopen, and we don't have this going into 2022. But if a lot of people refuse it, well, whether you believe in it or not, we have a chance it won't reopen in the way it needs to, and then that's when you see the business is impacted.
This is an interesting role as mayor. I depend on the professionals. I depend on Dr. Henry. I depend on the medical profession to lead us through this. There were a few communities in BC when this first started that put in their own municipal state of emergency. And I wasn't prepared to do that because I had a hunch that the province would come in and declare a provincial state of emergency. You don't want to hear those words. And I hope that I only hear them this one time. But the minute the province steps in, it gives us more flexibility. We know then that what we do in Prince George is going to be the same as they do in Terrace because it's a provincial state. If we do it one-off, we could do something completely different in Prince George. Kamloops may do something completely different. So you don't have the consistency fighting the pandemic. And that's why I was so pleased when the province came in and said, look, we're going to declare a provincial state of emergency. And that overrode any municipality wanting to do it.
Which will hopefully be lifted sooner than later, right?
Well, I see the numbers are down today, both hospitalizations and cases down about 14 to 16%, but still numbers that we had not seen for a very long time.
Yeah. So I just think back, I mean, you were elected mayor in 2014. What a wonderful couple of years that was for our community, with anticipation of the city centennial, the 2015 Canada Winter Games in the city, and the UNBC, their 25th anniversary. Just lots of positive things happening. It definitely wasn't easy to predict the next few years being as challenging as they were for not just you as a mayor, but you as a community member, right? Let's talk about some positives. Elected in 2014, re-elected in 2018. What has been your most memorable experience as mayor in this city?
Well, I think that, I got in 2014 and was sworn in December of that year and got through Christmas, and next thing I know, we're celebrating the 2015 Canada Winter Games here in Prince George, and I'm thrown right into it.
What a party.
What a party. And I was excited. I mean, that was 2 weeks of nonstop. I remember my wife and I and the kids, we were going, if it was something going on, we were going. We wanted to embrace every bit of this. Yeah. And then I think, the other positive thing, Scott, is the fact that, I talked about development. I talked about wanting to move us into that big city realm. And I remember other mayors calling me and saying, you're on the cusp of becoming a big city, but be ready for it. It's exciting, but there's a tremendous amount of challenges with that. And that really stands out to me because I saw that starting to happen after the Canada Winter Games. And I had said many times that those games were going to be the foundation to really push us forward. And there are a lot of good things happening in this city. Beyond development, beyond what we've talked about, it is just an absolutely unbelievable place to live and raise your family. And all of us get out and enjoy the parks, the hiking, the rivers, the lakes. And I think that during times of COVID and things are a little bit negative, I think you have to think about those positive things and why you live here.
So what are the positive things you see happening in Prince George over the next 5 years? Like, what are the big things that we should look forward to? If they work out, we won't hold you to it, but what do you hope happens over the next 5 years? Buildings and projects and the community in general.
I think we're going to see a community that has grown into itself. We've come full circle. I think over the next 5 years, we're going to really celebrate and really understand and absorb what Prince George is at perhaps 88,000 people. And you're going to see a city that, as I said, I hate to beat it up, but growing into itself. And there are a lot of good things that are on the horizon. I think we'll see the tech sector, for example. We have had great enthusiasm from the tech sector throughout Canada and in the States interested in what's going on in Prince George. I think we're going to see continued resource sector development. And I think one of the things that excites me the most is that we have laid the foundation for young folks to be able to graduate, go to CNC, UNBC, get into the trades, and they're going to stay here. And I think we're going to end up seeing a much younger city. And I've said, when I first got the job, I said, if you're a senior and you're retired, I don't mind you going away for the winter, but I want you to come home in the spring. And now my message is to those young kids that are graduating this year, graduating 4 or 5 years from now, there's opportunity here, and there will continue to be. I want you to stay here, go to university here, do a little bit of traveling, but I want you to come home. I want you to raise your family here. It's an inexpensive place to buy a house. It's got all the recreational opportunities you can ever want.
Oh yeah.
And I think, Scott, you've really hit the nail on the head. Is that during a pandemic or any times you can get bogged down in the negativity. And you can't. You've got to talk about the positive reasons that you've chosen Prince George to live. I know what mine are, and I've fulfilled them.
I feel like the pandemic actually highlighted a lot of the benefits of living in Prince George. During a global pandemic, the number one commodity in the world is space, and we have a lot of it in Prince George. And one thing that I just want to touch on what you just said is these university students that are graduating from UNBC or going through the Trades and Technology program at CNC, there's a trend where they are staying in Prince George, but you also see that with the Jim Pattison group, where you used to see a co-host or somebody from BCIT come and they might get a position with CKPG News for 6 months and then they move on to a bigger market or a bigger station. That's not happening anymore. You have difference makers in our community, say like Camille McDonald, who left Jim Pattison Group, started her own media companies, doing amazing. You have somebody like Rich Abney, who's doing incredible work with communications and marketing up for UNBC Athletics on campus. And you didn't see that in the past. And then that's another example of people wanting to stay in Prince George. While we're speaking about the Jim Pattison Group, I just want to recognize one person, and that individual is Mike Benny, and say thank you for the proclamation of Mike Benny Day that you organized, because I know that meant a lot to the community and his family, and it was really nice to see that. And what a great guy. Yeah, he is.
He did so much for the community, and I think it was Doug Jones interviewed me and said, how would you sum up Mike? And I said, committed to his family, committed to the community, and committed to his job.
I would define Mike Benny as Prince George. That's the funny thing. If I had to pick someone who I would epitomize as Prince George, a little bit sarcastic, a little bit silly, all heart, willing to participate, still humble. I would always ask him to participate in charity projects, and of course my face is plastered out there, and Mike Benny would be like, yeah, I'll do it, but just let me do this one quieter. And I was like, what? The loudest guy who's got this funny personality, but he did want to give back, but quieter.
Didn't we do a dunk tank?
Mm-hmm.
And I made a comment about that. That was at the Coast Inn.
Yeah.
And Mike was there, and he interviewed me. And I'm sitting in the chair, and I look over my back, and he's got this extension cord plugged into electrical box, and it's connected to this ring that's a heater, and he's got it in the water. And I said, Mike, what is that? Well, they use it on the farms. They put it in the water troughs to keep them from freezing. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, have you ever thought about what might happen? Didn't you ever think about it, in Science 8 when they talk about electricity and water? And it was just kind of, well, it's not a big deal. I'm not sitting.
Yeah, I'm not sitting.
I'm not sitting over top of that tub of water. Don't worry about it.
So having said that, just a thought I have, whenever I meet someone like yourself, Shirley Bond, Selin Alpay, it's really easy to get angry or hate on someone you haven't met.
Yeah.
And I would have too. I would have said, when you got elected, I remember, because I met Colin Kinsley having a beer as soon as he was elected, and you were so calm and quiet and professional, so different from what I remembered from some of our mayors who were definitely more bold and brash and out there. And I went, oh, this guy's too quiet for me, because I'm a loud, obnoxious, kind of like out in your face person. I was too quiet. And it took a long time before I really got to meet you and talk to you. And I went, oh, man, he's all heart.
Still,
and then,
still waters run deep. That's what my dad used to say. And you know, I can get fired up. For me, it was just put my head down and go to work.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted.
I was thoroughly impressed with that, though, as I've gotten to know you, which is why it was so important. I was like, we're going to discuss this subject. But I say all this with a point. It's really easy to judge someone and beat someone up who you haven't met.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And just recently, for the first time in 8 years, or I don't know, it's not 8 years yet, but 6 years being mayor, I called you the Teflon mayor because you just had win after win after win, success after success. And if people look back, that's what I think they should remember, is that you did what you said you were going to do. You set goals, you accomplished, and the city is in a better place. But recently we had some people who were extremely angry, and the Citizen, which we know about getting beaten up in the Citizen articles, me and Scott have also, is quite hard on you about the cost of the fire hall and a bridge and the parkade.
Yeah.
So let's touch on that.
Sure.
Explain. So first of all, when there's a cost overrun on the first two, like the bridge and the fire hall, and how does that happen? How did it happen?
So when you take a look at projects, and I'm going to get to something that we just did last night, actually, that is part of the plan. But when you take a look at projects and you go out and you tender projects, it can be a price on a Monday, and by the time you get out to tender and you go through the process, that price is increased, or the price remains, but costs increase for various products, whether it's cement, steel, you name it. Or you get into, for instance, the bridge or the sinkhole. And before you know it, that becomes a bigger issue as you dig deeper, if you will. And none of us are happy about it. None of us are happy that we're seeing this. And so it is a real challenge. And I understand the taxpayers. I understand their frustration. Last night, and I think this is part of the piece that we're working on, and there'll be more come out. I made a statement on January 25th on behalf of council about all the things we're going to do, and those will start to come out. But the piece that's important is last night at council we passed a motion to have our capital project process reviewed, right from the idea and the development of the idea to the procurement, and that's important. So that process needs to be reviewed to make sure that it's tight. It's tight from a timeline, and it's tight from the fact that we are building a project that has a tight timeline and a tight budget. I'm going to go to the fire hall and the pool, for example. So the fire hall, we went to referendum, and the pool as well. But by the time we got in the ground, we were some 18 months after the referendum. Well, guess what? It didn't matter what you were going to buy in that 18 months. It increased in cost. And that's some of what we faced. Fortunately, in the pool, phase 1 came in. We're on time. We're on budget. We'll get a report on phase 2 probably in about 3 or 4 months, sometime in the fall. So I think just a little bit closer vigilance. Council wants to be kept informed about these projects and where we're going with timeline and dollars. That's the key piece for us. And so we've got that in place. There'll be more coming out as a result of the information that I brought forward last January. So we're trying, just to make sure that council is fully informed. Communication is important at all levels within government. So that's where we're at, David.
But and that's fair. So just so I'm clear on what you're saying, there is answers coming out on what occurred. they're not going to be discussed here in this
No.
limited time we have left, but you are putting out answers, and they will be clear so that people can understand how it occurred.
Yeah, last night was the first piece of that, around that capital project process review. That's key for us. That's one of the key pieces.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if man, that's a tough one. So are all the problems, were they the same? Would you say what happened at the bridge, what happened at the fire hall, or what happened at the parkade?
No, I think it's all, every project is different, and I'll use the sinkhole. As you know, we went in to that location, I think, a couple of times, repaired it, it was fine, and then all of a sudden we're into a full-blown issue, and it is a sinkhole. And and I'm not an engineer. I'm a guy that gets information, and so we see that the infrastructure below ground there is decades and decades and decades old. And we have a failure. We need to fix that. Well, it was not a quick fix. And so the next thing you know, we're doing work to protect major water lines that are flowing in every direction. I call these main infrastructure intersections in our city, and that's one of them. And then, if you recall, we were having to drain water out of that sinkhole, but we were also having to make sure that the creek that we were draining into was protected. It just blossomed. We had no ability with that sinkhole to say, well, this will be a quick fix for $500,000. I mean, it's underground. And as I said, the more we dug, the more we realized that we had a significant problem at that intersection.
So I think part of the problem is where people got frustrated wasn't the fact that a project goes over. Like, everyone right now knows the cost of lumber. They're fully expecting a house is going to cost more. And the reason is because it's all over the news and the media that lumber costs a fortune. And they've got their Facebook memes. Even if you don't watch the news, you've got a meme about old lumber being worth a fortune. I think part of the frustration was people just felt like it was withheld from them. What would be your incentive to withhold the information or delay it? Why would you withhold it or delay it?
I think, and I go back to the communication piece, which is important. And that's why when we came out in January with the statement from council to just identify the issues and identify what we were doing about them, and we had asked for some time, and that's what we're going to communicate.
Oh, okay. And then that'll be the explanation. I wasn't really asking what the answer is. I'm saying, what incentive? Like, if someone was accusing you of intentionally hiding it, I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense to me. What advantage to you would there be from hiding it? Eventually, the price is coming out. You would have had to know that. It's going to become public. So is it just that you have to wait?
Well, so that I go back to the communication and the review process that we're doing, and I hate to keep saying it, but the review process in developing projects is a communication tool. It's a communication tool for council.
Right, so there was no process.
That's kind of the first step. Well, there's processes all along the way, so what you try to do is ensure that the communication piece is in place and we understand which direction we're taking.
Right, and then people, if they know, well, you know what, it costs a ton more money to divert a road, or the sinkhole goes twice as deep as we thought, I think then people are less frustrated.
So we get projects around, what was it, 2 winters ago, we had a horrific water main break on 3rd Avenue on the other side of Victoria Street, and up towards the Dairy Queen. Big job. Our guys did it in, I think, about 30 hours. A costly project. And one of the things that I've been talking about for years and years and years is that our below ground infrastructure in some areas is 80 years old. We'll dig up a spot and there will actually be wooden piping, if you will. And you're just unaware of that. So we're trying to look at neighborhoods and do an assessment, and our staff are doing a great job on assessing where, in fact, we may have our next issue. Where is our oldest portion of infrastructure, whether it's sewer lines, water lines, drainage lines? Where is that in our city? Let's key in on that and do what we can do to determine whether or not we're going to have a significant break there. It's like looking into a crystal ball, though they in fact have some expertise and engineering capabilities to determine some of that.
Well, we knew getting into this.
It's a heck of a challenge.
We knew getting into this we wouldn't be able to get every answer, but I'm glad to hear that the answers are coming out. That you guys are developing a process to explain and to let everyone know, and I look forward to seeing that myself. Because I didn't like knowing you and knowing how passionate and how much you care about the community. I'm just going to say, even whether you made a mistake or didn't make a mistake, whether somebody else made a mistake or didn't make a mistake, I think the mistake the community would make would be ever to doubt that you deeply care about Prince George, and that's the sense I've gotten from meeting you. And so with that, when someone has complained and said, oh, they did this wrong or this is why they're wrong, I'm like, that does not mean you can paint that person with a blanket brush saying that now everything they did is bad and they're bad, whether they did or didn't. And that's where I get frustrated with the media as they try to turn someone into a villain automatically. If they get a bone or a bite on something that they want to make that the story, then they'll just make someone a villain. But that's not how life works.
I think one of the exceptionally great things about politicians in Prince George in the north, and really a lot of places in Canada, is that to me they really feel like they're ingrained community members. I had a friend south of the border reach out to me a couple weeks ago and say, politics is so boring in Canada. And I was like, thank you. That's what we want. I mean, we have politicians in this community that are community members who care about what happens in Prince George, just like any regular citizen. And one thing that we haven't touched on yet is I want to give praise to the city council. I see young difference makers in this community like Corey and Kyle, who to me that's the future of Prince George, and I hope the younger generation before them looks at them as role models, knowing that they can make a difference if they ever go down the political field.
Can I just interrupt for a minute, Scott? I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to make a comment on that earlier, is that you take a look at that millennial group, or a little bit older. I see more interest in public service, whether it's sitting on a board, whether it's running for school district, whether it's running for MLA, MP, city council, and that's exciting for me because it's that group that we've been trying to engage for a very, very long time. And many are reluctant to get involved. Many don't want to enter into politics at any level because, it's not always an easy ride. And you step up because you want to do something, and it may sound cliche-ish, but you step up because you've got an idea. You want to make a bit of a difference in your community. So how are you going to do that? You got a lot of choices. You can sit on the board at CNIB, at hospice. You can run for political position, but it's a big decision, and you don't go into it with the idea that this is going to be kind of an easy go. It's not an easy go. It's a tough job.
Yeah.
And so when I see the Kyles and the Corys of the world, and there's others throughout the north that are stepping in and getting elected first time out, I think, we're in a pretty good place.
We absolutely are, yeah. And one of the things that I feel that during your term that's worked out extremely well is the enhanced partnership with the Clayton Tenay.
Yeah.
And you look back at the 2015 Canada Winter Games, like they were the first co-host in history throughout the history of the games for it to be the Clayton Tenay and the city of Prince George co-hosting the games. And just this last Saturday, Andrew was mentioning that the new chief of the Clayton Tenay, that Dolly Logan, I don't know if I'm allowed to call her Dolly yet because I haven't met her, so Dolene, but Dolene, she was just sworn in. To me, I think that's great news. What do you see in terms of leadership qualities in Dolly and moving forward?
She made a comment that she was going to involve the entire community, the entire nation, and that really resonated with me. And I think that that's really her focus. And I've worked with Chief Frederick, Chief Poutney, and now Chief Logan, and they all want a strong partnership with the city of Prince George. And it's just about how we can work together to, if we need seniors housing in Prince George, if we need First Nations housing in Prince George, how can we work together to make that happen?
That's just smart.
And it is. Yeah. And there's things that they would like to see happen on reserve. And so how can we help? How can I help as mayor? How can council? How can our administration help? If they're going to go to Victoria and lobby for something that's within our municipality and it's good for them and good for us, why wouldn't we go together? It's just the way it works. And and of course, with the new legislation, UNDRIP plays an integral role for every municipality. So why not have that strong partnership with your First Nations neighbor?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. We actually had Kim Gucci on the podcast last week. What a phenomenally talented artist. Some of her music, if anyone has a chance, Go to YouTube and look up her live performance at the Playhouse with Northern Sky that Six Sigma did. It will blow you away. Absolutely.
That's a human being that talked about reconciliation. I really liked that, And that's where I think Prince George does have an advantage. Our leaders and the people who are typically leaders in the community, from Todd and Shirley and yourself, are all very connected in the community and all very much part of the community. And that's where I think we're fortunate. We have an approachable mayor. We have an approachable MLA. We have an approachable MP, and they're active, and you can message them on Facebook or call their office, and they'll call you back.
You can call my house.
Yeah. If you go to City of PG website, your mobile phone number is on there.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting that just pick up the phone.
Yeah,
and phone Shirley or phone Todd, and I'll use the NAV Canada issue. And we were at risk of losing our air traffic control tower being staffed, and it would have been a huge impact for us. So I started to make a few calls and a few more calls and a few more calls, and those calls then extended back to the mayor of Regina, and then next thing you know, the premier of BC and the other 5 provinces that are going to be hit with this issue sign a letter, send it to NAV Canada and the Minister of Transportation federally. And one of my initial calls was to Shirley and Mike's office and Todd and Bob, and say, hey, look, we need you to jump on board here. Todd, you used to work at the airport. I'll tell you what, they just jumped on board, no questions asked. I can't tell you if that works in Kelowna or works in Vancouver, but I know it works here. And I remember saying that if you see me in Costco or Superstore or Save On, come on up and let's have a chat. Tell me what you think about the city. And that's continued to this day.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it right now.
It's just the way it is.
We're just 2 Prince George guys.
I think
asking questions.
Dave probably texted you at like 10 o'clock at night last week saying, hey, Lyn, do you want to do this podcast? Within minutes, let's do it. And I just want to finish with a compliment, because we are running out of time, but there are a lot of amazing nonprofits and charities out in this community. And I have to say, like, every single time that Dave or I have reached out to you saying if you want to be part of something or if you want to help promote or raise awareness for a certain event or nonprofit, you've always stepped up to the plate. There's probably a lot of people that might think that's what you do full time. But if you spend an hour out of your day helping with a certain initiatives, that's just an extra hour that you have to work later that day to get all the work done, right?
Yeah, but it's part of the job, Scott, and you know that. It's just the way it is, and I like doing that stuff. Yeah. And not always the best guy in front of the camera or in front of the microphone, probably better at just going into my office, putting my head down and going to work. But I really do enjoy when you guys call, and whatever it is I can do for you, just let me know. But I do want to say, too, that when you talk about difference makers in this community, you guys aren't just from Prince George. You are difference makers in this city. And I've had an opportunity to meet both of you and spend a lot of time around you and get to know you pretty well just over the last 5 or 6 years. Yeah. And it's things like this that you do, things you're doing all over the community, you guys, that make a heck of a difference.
Yeah, we have about a 50% approval rate now in the city,
Perfect.
So we're getting up there. Yeah. One thing I want to mention is the Wheelin' Warriors of the North, because there's a bit of a funny story here. It's I believe that Sydney was riding for a family friend, a different team.
Yeah, her cousin.
Her cousin, that's right. Yeah, and so that was
cancer survivor.
2019. And I remember you've done the ride as well, Dave. You had a different experience. Hurricane style. But I remember coming around this corner, and there were literally thousands and thousands of people from across the province and beyond that would participate. And all of a sudden, there you are, traffic control in like one of the busiest intersections in it must have been like by Langley or somewhere. Yeah. And I don't know how you got suckered into that role, but it was pretty funny because my girlfriend had a pretty horrific accident.
She did. And I came across that accident just like, I think, seconds after it happened.
Yeah. And so she doesn't remember that day. Yeah. And she's lucky really to be walking. Oh, yeah. And so we get back to the big camp where they call it Tent City, and that's where all the riders on their first night sleep. And you grabbed all of her bags and walked about a kilometer to where her tent was and dropped off all of her bags, making sure she was all right. And then afterwards I was talking to her. I was like, oh, that's so great that Lyn was able to help you out. And I told her that you're the mayor of Prince George. She had no idea the entire time, not a clue that it was the mayor of Prince George down in somewhere outside Cloverdale helping her out with those bags. So,
well the Wheelin' Warriors fearless leader was the one that talked me into being a crew member at a lunch at Nancy O's.
Okay, shout out to Karen Piche.
Karen Piche is never shy to ask.
And I've known Karen for years. She grew up with my wife. Actually, there's a picture of Karen and her on this little bike with the banana handlebars, and I forget, I think it's my wife sitting in between the handlebars, or maybe Karen, but she said, would you be a crew member? I said, yeah. She said, can you ride your motorcycle down? I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm in. What do I do? Well, it'll all come together. Well, yeah, so it was pouring rain the day I was supposed to leave, so I said, to heck with it, I'll just drive my vehicle down, and went to the crew meeting. Oh man, there was hundreds of us.
And with all of us being Wheelin' Warriors alumni, like how extraordinary that this team, based in little old Prince George, has raised over $1 million for the BC Cancer Foundation.
Yeah.
Unreal.
But if you look at all of the other organizations that you two guys are involved with, the Wheelin' Warriors, but Hospice House and the work that Donna and her team do, and I don't mean to leave anybody off the table. That's why for me, when I say thanks, it's just community-wide. But the work that Donna does, and just, it's unbelievable.
I want to finish letting people know one thing that it meant a lot to me anyways. I haven't kept it a secret that I've had a tougher year. Definitely had lots going on. And I'm really fortunate and blessed that I have quite a few friends and quite a few people who checked up on me. But something that really was profound for me and showed me exactly how connected our community leaders are is when couldn't have even been much more than a couple months ago. I don't know what I had said that day or what I had done, but it was like 9:35 p.m. at night and my phone rang, and it was Lyn. It was our mayor phoning me at 9:35 p.m. And so I'm like, oh, okay, what do you want? And he literally just called to say, just calling to make sure you're okay and checking in on you. It was the most surreal moment for me. I was like, this is super weird. But so that is why I'm a fan of yours, because that for me was like a really beautiful thing that I really deeply valued, and why I'll have your back.
Anyways. To me, that's the power of community, that example there. And I'm going to give another example. My parents were celebrating their 70th birthday last year. They still talk about it to this day. I mentioned it just in passing, probably about a couple of weeks before their actually 70th birthday. They have birthdays 5 days apart. And you went up and personally delivered a card and a bottle of wine to them.
Yeah, let's not forget the wine.
Yeah.
Lorrelle and I went up.
Absolutely.
We had a nice visit.
Yeah. And, it's something that, really just... It was heartfelt gesture that touched them, and they still talk to it about this day. So
that's Prince George.
That's Prince George for you right there, the power of community.
Yep. Yeah.
We always finish with a couple questions in terms of, since this is called the Crazy Damn Canadians podcast, sure. we kind of just have some light.
I wondered how I fit into that. Anyway,
not very crazy.
So we just always end with a question asking our guests. Could you name a Canadian, whether you've met them or not, that has just really inspired you over the years and has helped maybe shape the person you are today?
Spent a lot of time reading, watching, listening to Terry Fox.
Good one. That's our favorite answer.
And I have a story, and thanks to you, I showed up at the Terry Fox run that started Exploration Place. Was that 2019, the last one?
Yep.
And I'm a huge Bobby Orr fan. There's a picture of Bobby Orr and Terry Fox side by side, and Orr's got his armor wrapped around him, and I said, holy cow, that's a fantastic picture. And you, Scott, said, take it. It's yours. And I didn't know what to say. And once you get to know me a little bit, I guess I'm more, I would much rather you phone me so I can do you a favor or you a favor than me ask for anything. And it was, the gesture was unbelievable. I have that hanging downstairs in my house. And if my wife let me, it'd be in my living room. Because those are two of my heroes. So there it is.
Bobby Orr is a football player, right?
Yeah. Good way.
Nice work.
Sorry,
Dave.
I had to do it. Everybody knows how to watch sports. I know he's hockey.
And you know, speaking about Terry Fox, one of his good friends growing up is Rick Hansen, and
Right there.
there you go.
Looks like him. Is that him?
Yeah, he's right behind Andrew
on the
there.
screensaver
That-
on Andrew's
yeah.
computer.
That's actually his convocation picture from UBC. Maybe we can show the picture in the podcast, but he was the first individual with a physical disability to graduate from the physical education program at UBC.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then after that, he
Wow.
went on to win 19 world marathons and start the Man in Motion World
Yeah.
Tour.
Well, I think I told you the greatest picture that I like of him is when he's on the Great Wall of China.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's powerful.
That's
and
good.
that's the first memory I have of him as a kid.
That
Was
is
watching. That's when it hit the news.
Yeah.
When this crazy Canadian
There
in
it
a
is.
wheelchair was on the Great Wall.
Yeah.
And it was all over the news, and we stopped. And then you started watching the rest of that tour. Every day you were looking for information on him.
I know you want to wrap up, you guys, but I mean, I could sit here and talk all day, but it's, for me, it's almost incomprehensible, the fortitude of these two guys to do what they did. That's, to me, it's just unbelievable. Like, where do you get that?
Yeah. And there is only one picture in the entire world of Rick Hansen and Terry Fox together, and it's right outside Four Seasons Pool, 1979, Prince George to Boston Marathon. The only picture
Wow.
of those two together.
Right there.
Yeah. And that's now in the podcast too. I love that, Andrew.
Nice work, Andrew. Yeah, killing it
Yeah.
today.
Well, Mayor Lyn Hall, I think that was a fantastic episode. I'm so glad you came and that we got a lot of
thanks for the invite.
constructive conversation. If it had a little bit of a darker tone, it's because we're trying to fix some issues in the community,
Yep.
and I think that'll really help people to frame how they think about it.
Yeah, and we got, as I said, there's lots more to do, and on all levels. So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you,
Thanks.
Andrew.
Thanks very much, you guys.